So we're up to page Lamed Aleph. We're up to Perek Sheni. That's the second chapter of the book. So the full first chapter was dedicated to emulating God's ways, and specifically the midas of Rachamim, based on the Yud Gimel midas of Rachamim. And we discussed in the context of the Yud Gimel midas of Rachamim, on different occasions, the idea of the Spheros. And from this point on, the book is going to go into more depth the idea of the Spheros. So this first, meaning the second chapter, is really dedicated to the sphere of Keser. That's the all-inclusive sphere.
That's the first sphere?
That's the first sphere. And so the whole chapter 2, is somewhat lengthy, dealing with the different aspects of Keser. And then, from then on, the different chapters are going to be dedicated to different of the spheros. The third chapter being Chokhmah, the fourth being Bina, and so forth and so on. And the emphasis is going to be on explaining a bit about the sphere itself, using more of the Kabbalistic meanings or explanations of what the sphere is about. And then again, following suit with what we've seen so far, with the Midos, the author is going to try and show how the deeper teachings of the Spheros can be integrated by us for better, more Torah-like, practical, beneficial living. So that's what Perek Sheni does. Okay? So he says, Od lios ha'adam dome l'koinoi besod midas keser. Furthermore, insofar as a person is created in the image of God through the sephira of Keser, tzarich shihiu bo kama gufei peulos, there should be found in a person several spheres of activity, shehem ikar anhaga, which are dedicated primarily to this kind of attribute, although it's really a faculty. I mean, it's really both, but emulating the sphera of Keser. So he's going to explain in this second chapter, I think 6 different aspects of Keser which we should incorporate into our living. So let's see them. Harishona, the first aspect of Keser which we should know and then try and emulate is that it's koleles hakol. That the sphere of Keser, as we mentioned, contains within it everything. Keser is the first sphere, it's the all-inclusive sphere. Keser means crown, and like a crown around the head, so Keser includes within it everything. And just like the head, the mind is the seat of all of the faculties and all of the forces and all the powers of our being, so to the Keser encircles, encompasses all of that. Everything is contained within that. And if you think for a minute about how a person might have an idea, that idea becomes like a spark in his mind. It's like a germinal spark, and he can think it in an instant. And included within that spark of an idea might afterwards be hours and hours of thought in terms of translating that germinal idea into, let's say, the details required to execute that thought, and then many, many more hours might be involved in actually executing the thought. But everything is all in that germinal one spark, right? You might think, for example, thinks instantaneously that he's going to go somewhere. In that thought of going somewhere includes who he's going to go with, when he's going to go, how he's going to get there, what he's going to take with, when he's going to arrive, what he's going to do there, how is he going to do it, how is he going to afford it. Right? It's all there in that one germ. That one germ. That's Keser. Keser is that point within which the divine plan for creation is seated or ignited, and from there, everything proceeds according to the plan. The details are worked out. from Keser to Chochmah to Bina to Das and so forth and so on. So that's Keser. Keser is HaKoleles Akol. It includes within it everything.
So is that like, in scientific terms, would that be like the Big Bang? Or something would be like the ultimate chesed?
Could be. I mean,
Like
I don't know if it would be the ultimate Keser, because, but it might be kind of a manifestation of the Keser. It might be like a physical manifestation of the Keser. You know, I can see that. I mean, we did speak about how there are basically four olamos: Atzilus, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. And each olam has its 10 spheros, where the malchus of the one fits into the keser of the one below it. So that, if there was a Big Bang, and if that Big Bang was, the cause for the proliferation of the physical universe, so that could be, according to the way you're viewing it, the keser of the realm of the world of Asiya.
So are the other worlds non-physical?
Non-physical.
Right?
Yeah. Asiya is the physical world, the world of actually making the physical making of the plan. Mm-hmm. But the keser that we're talking about would be the keser in Atzilus.
Okay.
The keser in Atzilus, which is the highest sphere of keser in the highest olam of Atzilus, which is below what we call Ein Sof. Ein Sof meaning the infinity of God. So that if you think about God's kind of plan to create, Keser would be that spark of an idea in which all of the myriad details of creation are included. And it's from Keser that they proceed. He midas anava. And he says what seems to be a contradiction, that this Keser, which includes everything, is really an expression of anava, humility, which is kind of counterintuitive, because something as all-inclusive as Keser would seem to have every reason to be something which is elevated and arrogant and haughty. But he says that's not the case. Keser has the quality of being related to the midah of anava, of humility. Hipnei shehi teluya bekeser, and this is because humility is connected to keser. Why? Sharehi midah al kol midos, because the attribute of humility is elevated above all other good attributes. Ve'ena mis'alis sheharehi midah al kol midos. Sorry, he means to say, not what he means to say is that Keser, he calls Keser here a midah, but he's referring to Keser. Sharehi, meaning Keser, is a midah al kol midos, is a midah. That's why he's saying a faculty or an attribute. It's a sphera which is above all other spheros, and it has within it everything. Ve'enemis ales umisgayes lamala. But the keser, which is above everything else, is not haughty and arrogant, severing itself from those below it. On the contrary, umnam yoredes umistakeles lamata todir. Keser is always looking down below. Right? He's speaking, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Analogously? Yeah. Keser's not looking. But the point is, Keser includes within everything. It's also above everything. And you'd think that Keser, therefore, would be, as it were, an expression of arrogance and what's it called when somebody kind of, not supercilious is not the word, the other way around. When a person is condescending. That's what I was looking for. You think it'd be condescending, but that's not the case. We find that Keser is very humble rather than elevating of itself, raising its head, as it were. Keser lowers its head and looks downward, acting as a conduit through which the divine will is expressed into the lower spheros. So it shares everything that it's given. Not only does it share it, it actually passes it on. And that's an act of humility. V'zeh mishnei ta'amim. And this happens for two reasons. Ho'echad, the one is, shehu bosh lihistakel b'sibaso, because Keser itself is embarrassed, as it were, to look at its cause. What's the cause of Keser? Ein Sof. So Keser, despite the fact that it's being extremely elevated, including everything, nevertheless is not haughty. It's humble. Why? Because it's constantly aware of the presence of God above it. Keser receives all of its influence from God. So rather than arrogantly raising its head against God, as it were, Keser humbles its head before God. And this is one reason why, as a result of that, Keser is looking below in order to benefit and share with those who are below it, the spheres which are below it.
So the spheres each have like personalities, like they have choice on how whether or not they're humble, or it's just describing how God. I don't know. I don't understand like what their motivation for not acting as that function would be. You know.
Yeah, I think that he's speaking as an analogy. He's speaking as an analogy. We have God, and we have these attributes of God. We're to emulate the attributes of God. One of the parallel to the Yud Gimel Midos, the 13 attributes of mercy, there's also the 10 spheros. So what he's saying is we can emulate the qualities of God by looking at the quality and the relationships of the spheros, and learn how to emulate God through them. Doing so, he's describing the spheros, like I said, metaphorically. Okay. Keser doesn't have feeling. Keser doesn't have free will, right? But the point is, what's the relationship of Keser? What's the quality and the behavior of Keser, as it were? And what he's saying is, despite the fact that Keser is elevated above all and includes within it all, it is not haughty as a result of that, right? On the contrary, it's used to share or acts as a venue through which the divine will is expressed. So rather than raising, as it were, its head to be haughty, it's aware of being subservient to God above, and therefore lowers its head, as it were, below. And that's one reason why Keser acts with humility towards those below it. Elishamatzil mabid bo tomid lahativoy. Right? Keser is embarrassed to look at its source. Rather, the ma'atzil that's coming from God, who's bringing this emanation into the realm of Atzilus, looks on to the Keser, Tomid lahativo, to do good for it. And it, meaning the Keser, looks to share this goodness from God which is bestowed upon it to those below it. So there's an issue here about anava, which is humility, and also gira, which is fear. And what we're being told here is that the quality of Keser is anava, not gira. Anava, not gira. Humility and not fear. What's the difference between humility and fear? A person who is humble fears, meaning a person who's humble expresses fear towards others, towards the people that he humbles himself before. And somebody who fears somebody humbles himself before him. So they would seem to be the same thing, humbling and fear. But in truth, they're two different things. Humbling, that's anava. Anava is an issue of bittul. Bittul means nullifying, negating, nothingness. That's anava. Anava is the person doesn't feel anything of importance before this other person, for example. And that's why the person acts with humility. The result of that might be yira, but the source is anava. Okay? A person might have fear even though he's not an anav, however. A person might be very well aware of himself, yet fear someone else. And there, the person is not necessarily an anav. On the contrary, he might be a Baal Gaiva. He might be somebody who's arrogant. But he's forced to act in a way of fear because he fears what this person might do to him. Right? So they're really two different things. They might be related, but really the higher level is a nava. After that you have fear. A nava is a bittul of yesh, meaning a nullification of is. And it's what we call ein. So Keser has the quality of being ein, non-existent. Keser doesn't view itself as what it really is. Even though it's above everything else and including within it everything else, the relationship of Keser to Ein Sof, the sphere of Keser to God, is like a bittul of yesh. It doesn't exist. And therefore, it's purely a conduit or a channel or an instrument through which the divine influence flows, because it empties itself of self. Chochmah, which is underneath Keser, that corresponds to Yira. Why? Because Keser already has a quality, Chochmah has a quality of Yesh. It's something which comes into being through Keser, right? Once Keser, which is all-inclusive, and it has within it a fluid existence of everything, which becomes crystallized stage by stage through the spheros, the first realization of creation is actually in Chochmah. And that's Yira. So Chochmah feels Yira towards Keser. But that's because Chochmah has a substance of Yesh. Yesh means, existence. Something, yes? Right? And we say, Chochmah min Ein bata. Chochmah comes from nothing, from Ein. Chochmah comes from Keser. Or we say, there's a pasuk which says, Ekev anava yira, yirat shamayim. Ekev anava yirat shamayim. Through anava, humility, comes yirat shamayim. The first step is humility. That's the higher level. If a person has humility, then they'll feel yira. But it's not necessarily true the other way around, that a person who feels yira has the quality of anava. That's what we spelled out earlier. So ekev anava yirat shamayim. First comes anava, then comes yirat shamayim. Another way of looking at that is ekev means a heel. The heel of the body is an ekev. So ekev anava yirat shamayim. If keser is anava, the heel of keser, the place in creation to which keser first puts his foot down, is in Chochmah. And we said Chochmah is Yirat Shamayim, because Chochmah senses Yesh. Chochmah senses the feeling of being. And therefore, Ekev, Anava Yirat Shamayim. The heel, meaning the place to which Anava, that's Keser, reaches down and puts its foot down into the world, as it were, is where? Yirat Shamayim, that's Chochmah, that's Yesh. But Keser is Ein. There's another reason why Keser is called Ein and Chochmah is called Yesh, because we don't really understand Keser. Keser is above our comprehension. Once it starts to become differentiated into Chochmah, Bina, and Das, then we can start to have more of a concept of what these things are. Chochmah on its own, Bina on its own, Das on its own, and the interrelationship between them. But above Chabad, above Chokhmah, Bina, and Das, in the realm of Keser, that's a realm of fluid oneness, which is elevated above and including everything, that it's really beyond our comprehension of really what it is. So
it's almost like God in a way.
It's like God, although God is above that. God is like Ein Sof, or even above Ein Sof.
Yeah.
But there are two different reasons why we call, for example, Keser Ein, because Keser itself views itself as being nothing vis-a-vis God, right? But we also call it, but it's also called Ein because it's something which is incomprehensible to us. It is nothing that we can quantify. Chokhmah is Yesh. We can quantify Chokhmah. Chokhmah is something we understand. So we call that Yesh. But Keser is Ein. So it's called
the first filter.
Yeah, what?
It's
Keser.
The first filter.
Keser is. Yes, Keser. Yeah. And there's another verse which says, Reishis Chokhmah, Yiras Hashem. Reishis Chokhmah, at the beginning of Chokhmah, that's where you have Yiras Hashem. Reishis Chokhmah, Yiras Hashem. That Yiras Hashem starts where? It's Reishis, its inception is in Chokhmah. Above Chokhmah, that's another. So that's the quality of Keser, another. So when we want to emulate God's ways, we want to emulate the Spheros, the first to emulate is that of Keser, and the first aspect of emulating Keser is this quality of humility. So too a person must be embarrassed to look above, to raise his head high, in order to be arrogant and haughty. Even though a person is elevated very, very high in the hierarchy of creation, and there is included within a human being a great many things, still, like Keser, which is also elevated and all-inclusive, but is nevertheless humble, we too, despite we're being elevated and including very many things, also must act with the attribute of humility. Rather, a person should be regularly looking downward. In order to diminish his sense of self-worth as much as is possible. Maybe it's not self-worth, but to diminish his sense of self as much as possible. There's very deep ideas here. I mean, this is to be understood on several levels. First of all, it means in one's mind's eye, one should view himself as being as empty of self as possible. He should lower his head, meaning his thoughts, which could tend to arrogance. He should lower those thoughts, lower those thoughts of his head towards humility. But I think also it means physically. A person should assume a posture of humility as well, right? Rather than, lifting himself up and acting inflated and arrogant, he should physically have a demeanor and a posture of humility. The head should literally be lowered. And we find that that's the case. Right? Different, Musar works talk about how a person should have a physically humble demeanor as well. But the truth is, when a person says, well, I don't want to make a nothing of myself, that's actually not true, because the more a nothing of a person makes of himself vis-a-vis Hashem, the more he's actually emulating Keser and gaining grandeur because of being closer to Hashem. So we don't say that Keser is low and unimportant because it's nothing. On the contrary, to the extent to which Keser hollows itself of itself, empties itself of its sense of self, that's actually what elevates it higher and makes it enables it to include within it more than anything, all of the other spheres as well. So when a person truly empties himself of self, he's not degrading himself. He's actually being elevated by becoming closer to God, hollowing himself of self so that he can become more fully full of godliness. What were we going to say?
Well, I was going to say, Kesser is it's humble, even though it does have all this superiority over the other spheres. So if you're kind of take that attitude before you develop some sort of status in the world, then it's not really you're not really demonstrating like this act of humbleness. No one's going to recognize it if you walk around with your head down all the time. I think if it's more like once you kind of gain some kind of status and then show that you're humble, that's more of like a leadership role or like an example for other people. If you're relating Kesser to I guess human interaction, then you should relate all the other spheros as well, right? As other people.
Yeah, because you're saying that that Kesser didn't gain that elevation through humility.
Yeah.
It gained the elevation, and then acts in a way which is humble.
More or less, yeah. You get the point.
Yeah, I think so. Because I was saying more than that. I was extending it even further and saying that what actually makes Kesser elevated is its humility.
That's why it was placed in such a...
Yeah, I know. So I don't know which one came first. I mean, once it's there, it is humble, or because it's humble, it's there, or by virtue of the fact that it's there, it's humble. I'm not exactly sure. I think you're raising an interesting point, but still, Kesser maintains that elevated. Kesser certainly maintains that elevated status precisely because of its humility.
True, but also you said that the spheros below it feels the fear of Kesser.
No, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to say that they fear Kesser. But what I meant to say is that they are humbled to Hashem through the concept of existence, through Yesh. Whereas Kesser is humbled before Hashem through the concept of Ein. Yeah. So that, right, and that's Anava. That's Anava. Anava is it's what appears to be fear, but it's really humility because of the negation of oneself before God. But if somebody has a sense of self, so then that's not humility, that would be fear. And fear is not necessarily a negative thing. We're talking about fear as in awe. Right? I recognize the greatness of that thing vis-a-vis myself. But that's still based on, right, the focal point is a sense of self. Anava or Kesser would be, right, there is no I. Right? There is simply God. And that's why Kesser is such a very vital point in the system, that everything that comes through God is basically passed on into the spheros and not crystallized and not kept for itself. It's passed on. And that's why he says here, Kesser is not kind of, despite its elevated position and despite everything that's passing through it, it doesn't keep anything for itself. It humbly passes it on constantly to others. Because it could become full. If it were to retain for itself, it would become full of itself and therefore become haughty and arrogant. But it doesn't. It's constantly looking to empty itself of self. And this quality of humility is generally expressed or dependent on the position of the head. And of course, we know the relationship, we've discussed the relationship of head to Kesser. Yeah. And also we said, this is Kesser. A person does not become arrogant until he comes full of himself, and he raises his head. Klape mala, upward. Ve'onav, but the humble person, mashpil rosha lamata. He lowers his head below. So he did hear what I was suggesting earlier as well. Not only is this to be understood kind of on the mental level of arrogance and humility, but in the physical level, including the position of the head, insofar as the head corresponds to the keser, the keser of his body, that's his head, should be below and humbled.
So we should physically walk around with our heads down?
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, if we really did empty ourselves of self, then we would naturally be deflated.
But if we were created, we should have a feeling of ourselves, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
to some degree.
Yeah. So that's why he says here to the extent possible, because we can't be keser, but we can try and emulate keser. Okay. A person might become debilitated through humility.
Yeah.
And that certainly shouldn't be the case. For example, God appeared to Moses in the burning bush, and he called Moshe for this very important mission, this very important mitzvah. And it says Moshe wouldn't look. He yari lahabit ba. Moshe wouldn't look. He feared. He feared. And Hashem said, if you fear, that's because you have a sense of yesh. And I want you to become an onav, like it says about Moshe later, onav mikol adam. So Hashem said to him, shal na'alcha mal reglecha. Take your shoe off of your body. Right? Remove. What he was saying is, take your shoe off yourself. Take your shoe off your leg. Right? If you have fear, that's because you have a concept of yesh, and that's a sense of self. I want you to disrobe yourself of your sense of self. Take your shoe off, meaning remove your body from yourself and come close. And then Moshe was able to do so. He divested. He took his shoe off, which means is symbolic of his leaving his body, right? Shelling his body, divesting his body of himself, so that he had a much lower sense of self. And then he was able to come close, and he saw this wondrous thing. He gazed upon the glory of God. And Moshe himself became like the burning bush, where the fire of God was burning within him, but he wasn't consumed by that fire. And that was a portent for the future, when Moshe would be glowing with the glory of God, so much so that people who saw him would be blinded by the light. And Moshe had to cover himself with a veil because he was like that burning bush. What's the idea of the burning bush, the sneh? It's the low, insignificant, non-important remnant of life living in a barren place. And Hashem was telling Moshe this as well, that if you fear me, it's because you have a sense of yesh. Get out of yourself. Take yourself off. That shoe which is connecting you like a shoe to the earth, take that shell of earthliness off. Then you'll be able to come close to me and see me. And eventually you'll actually be able to be like this lowly bush itself, which has no sense of self, and for that reason is able to contain within it the glory of God without being consumed by it. And so Moshe himself became that very sneh. And every person has within his keser, right? He's got this spark of divine thought that we spoke about, including it, which has included within everything. We spoke about how you have keser, chokhmah, bina, and das in the left, right hemisphere and the central stem of the brain. And we also spoke about how the spheros then come, chesed, gvur, tiferes, netzach, hod, yesod, to the different parts of the body. There are 7, but there's also 7 apertures in the head. So when a person has that spark of the divine coming through the Keser, it radiates light out through his eyes, his ears, his nostrils, and his mouth. The 7 apertures of his head also become like spheros, which emanate divine energy. We usually think about them in receiving, right? Receiving eyesight, receiving smell, receiving taste, receiving sound. But if a person's really burning spirituality inside, those apertures become like holes through which the light of Hashem, which is kindled by the Chokhmah, Bin and Das, which is part of his own Keser, emanates the light of God into the world. And therefore a person can literally use his eyes, his ears, his nose, and his mouth to convey holiness, light, and energy to the world in a spiritual sense. When a person's operating physically, so they become apertures to take in the world. When a person's operating spiritually, they become apertures through which one can bring light, the spark of Chokhmah, which is inside Keser, because the person's humbly connecting himself to God. Okay, let's stop here and continue B'ezrat Hashem next time we meet.